Hi everyone, and welcome to the June edition of the Grafana Agent Community Call. Today we have two things on the agenda. The first thing is something Eric from the development team has been working on. It's automatic conversion of Prometheus configuration to Flow configuration. Flow is the new way of configuring the Grafana agent, and it is going to replace the old static mode of configuring the agent, which is essentially a combination of Prometheus configuration, OpenTelemetry configuration for traces, and also Promptel configuration for logs. So we're going to have an automatic way to configure configuration automatically from Promptel to Flow, from OpenTelemetry to Flow, and from Prometheus to Flow. But for now, we so far have been only working on the Prometheus to Flow part, and that is what Eric is going to present. Then for the second part of the call, we can review open proposals. They are on GitHub. So I'll share my screen and we can just go through them one by one. So yeah, for now, Eric, would you like to get us started on the configuration conversions?
Yes, thank you. Let me get my small slide deck up and on, and there we go. Yeah, let me know as usual if I forget to blow something up large enough, and I will do my best to do so. And here we go. So, all right, so automated config conversion. So what we want to talk about today, Paul teed it up nicely, is about how to get up and running with Flow quicker, how to take existing configurations and turn them into something that works without having to do a lot of effort, really. So we'll start here. So this, I say, maybe you've looked at Flow, you think it's great. We think it's great, of course, and you want to figure out, how do I get started with it? And I've got this configuration file that I know already works, but this configuration language is totally different, and I just want to get off the ground. This is where this comes into play. You can see on the left-hand side, we've got a Prometheus configuration file, and on the right-hand side, we have the translation of that to Flow. Okay. So what's the design for this? It's pretty straightforward, which is nice. At a very high level, what we're doing is we're taking the source config file and loading that into memory, and then we translate that into the Grafana agent Flow argument types, and then from those types we're able to generate the Flow config file. So it's nice because we've got the validation of the original source file already built in for free, if you will, and then we also make sure that we're generating good Flow config on the other end, because we're going through the actual Flow argument types in code. So the scope, as Paul did mention, we're starting with the Prometheus configuration, which is just about done. We're kind of dotting some I's, crossing some T's, that type of stuff with it, but that one's pretty much done, and should be part of the next release. Then we're doing Promptel, OpenTelemetry, and the big one that kind of combines the three plus some other stuff is the static mode of the agent itself. So that's kind of like the main thing we're progressing towards, because we want it to be easy to go from the older setup of the agent, the static mode, into Flow mode going forward. So that'll make that process a lot easier. So what were some of the technical challenges and things that we kind of had to decide on? So defaults is a big one. So we have defaults in the source configuration and we have defaults in Flow. So what we did was we said, hey, if we have a default in Flow and the source configuration file default matches, or somebody provides a value that matches the Flow default, let's leave it off of the Flow output, because the defaults will take care of it. what that does is it prevents us from creating a lot of configuration that's unnecessary. And then in the case where there's a default for the source configuration file and Flow's defaults don't match, we put the value on there with the source's default so that we don't lose that. So we're trying to preserve functionality by doing so. Secrets was one thing we had to tackle. That was just because natively, when you try to tokenize a secret, we hide it by just putting this exact string with secret in parentheses. But in our case, when you're converting a configuration file, if you have a secret value in it, you want to preserve that. And that'll be important when we talk about doing the conversion and running it on the fly. If we lose information, that would not be possible. We had to figure out how to handle component exports. So when we have one component reference and export from another component, there's some things that had to be tackled there. And then how do we manage unsupported features? So an unsupported feature is something that exists in the source configuration, but it may not exist in Flow yet, or it may not ever exist in Flow if it's not something that's planned to be supported. So we want to make sure we have warnings for that. And then also we want a way to return errors if something is totally wrong. So there's an example there with Prometheus configuration not parsing correctly. Okay. I think I gotta hit this. What did my video? Oh, there it goes. It's loading in. Big. So this is just taking a look at a little bit of a before and after of a configuration. So on the left, we have, once again, the Prometheus configuration. And on the right, we have the automated conversion results. So looking at this, we've got a couple scrape configs here. We've got this job name with Prometheus 1, and then we've got one with Prometheus 2. And we'll see that reflected on the right side. We also have this remote write section with a couple targets here. And we can see, looking at this first section, that those do, if we look at the remote write section, those do match up on the right side here. You'll also notice that stuff I was talking about with defaults, where there are things that are not listed in Prometheus because they're using the default values, but since our Flow defaults don't precisely match them, we've included them automatically so that the functionality is preserved. Okay, let's bump this one forward. Okay, so here we're focusing in on Prometheus 1, the scraping section here. And what we've got is we can see that there's multiple targets that are concatenated together. Here we can see on line 48 that there is a export used from a different component. So we've got that all working as well. So if there's multiple targets, handles that. Needs to reference another component, handles that as well. The Discovery Azure is defined over here on the Prometheus config side on line 17, and we can see that that's reflected on the right. Excellent. Okay. Oh, yeah. The other thing I want to mention is here's the example of the secrets not being obscured. So in here we have the basic auth section with the user and password, and then on the output we maintain that as well. And looking at the last section, so here I just want to include this one. We've got a relabel into the mix as well. So that's kind of that. So that's the metric relabel config section for Prometheus 2 being included. Okay. Coming soon. All right. So CLI options on the agent. And actually, there's an open pull request for the first of these right now. That should be merged soon. So there's two things we want to be able to do from the agent CLI command. So we want to be able to convert a configuration file, and I'll show a quick demo of that, where you provide whatever the source format file is. So if we're talking generally speaking here beyond just Prometheus, but Prometheus is the first one, we want to be able to take that configuration and convert it and output it into a river file. The second thing we want to be able to do is convert a Prometheus or whatever other source config we support into river and start the agent on the fly. So you wouldn't have to save that river file to use it, basically. We also want to have the option where you can bypass the warnings for the configuration. If it's something unsupported, maybe you're okay with that, you're aware of that, and you want to be able to move forward, or maybe you do want to be blocked by that. So we'll have the option for both there. We're also looking at documentation for best ways in general to migrate to the Grafana agent flow. I think the automated config conversions here are a piece of that, but there are other things that are not entirely part of just a configuration file translation. There might be other things, and we mentioned here the operator, other things where the way we do that might differ in flow versus static, and then there's some other instructions that are needed for those particular cases. Okay, and I think that covers that. Let's very briefly take a quick look at an example of just what the command line looks like today. I'll clear this. Okay. So what we're going to do is start with this configuration file. It's Prometheus configuration file has some stuff in it, and we're going to output the test.river to this directory here. So let's go ahead and fire it up. Okay, there we go. Drag this in. So now we've got this test river file that was just generated. And we're not going to study this thing in depth, but I just kind of wanted to demo, there's the before, and we've got our after with all the pieces from the input. And with that, we'll open up for any Q&A. Yeah, Matt.
Are warnings permanent, things we're not going to support, or are they going to kind of get resolved and get handled as time goes on?
I think it'll depend on what it is. As we add more features to Flow, some may go away, but there may be some things for certain configuration sources that we don't plan to support. There was one I was just starting to work on the static mode. So an example is the wall directory, where that same concept doesn't exactly apply in Flow. So if you have that on your source config file, we would pretty much always have a warning and say, hey, for Flow, it's not an unsupported warning necessarily, but it's like, hey, for Flow, this is done in a different way. So I would not expect a warning like that to go away. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and depending on exactly what it is. Yeah. Cool. Oh, okay. We'll go Paul and go next, and then back to Matt.
Yeah, I have a question as well. Do you think, question for Eric, do you think we would support conversion from something other than those three things that we mentioned, or four things, the open telemetry configs, Prometheus configs, Prompteo, and agent? Would we ever convert from another type of config?
I think that's a good question. I'll give you my personal take is I would like to make it as easy as possible for people to start using Flow. We've kind of scoped out where we want to hit, especially focused again on getting from the static mode of the agent to Flow, and then those other pieces kind of are part of the puzzle, so they kind of come along for the ride a little bit. And then we want to be closer to OPEL, so that's a motivator there. But yeah, I would like to see others in the future. I'm not sure where that'll get in like, you know, the priority to-do list, if you will. But yeah, I think we've kind of opened Pandora's box in that area, if you will, where we'll be able to do so using this groundwork. Yeah, Matt.
When running kind of in auto mode, and this something I haven't actually thought of, are we handling command line arguments?
Currently, this is just focused on the configuration file.
Mhm.
So you would use the flow command line arguments you'd be using with a non-flow file. So, you know, this is, you're in the fuzzy land in the migration guide area of things that are not, I'm converting config file A to config file B of a different type and having them be the same. So it's kind of like out of bounds of this, but in bounds of things we should consider. All right. Other questions, or if anybody thinks of any, you know, feel free to throw them in the chat or whatever, and I'm sure we can tackle them as we go here. But awesome, thanks guys. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you, Eric. That's a great presentation. Yeah, so the next part of the call is all about reviewing open proposals. But before we proceed, just want to ask, is there anything else that anyone would like to discuss? Or are there any particular proposals which you would like to discuss? Please let me know on the channel. I'm going to post a link to the proposals which we're going to review. Okay, so I think for now I can move on with the okay, so we're going to just review flow proposals. So use Robert's link. And I'll share my screen in a second and we can go through them. Okay, so again, if there's any particular proposal that you'd like to discuss, then just drop a note in the chat. And for now, we're just going to go through these one after the other. Yeah. So flow release plan. Let's go through here. Okay, this one is from Robert, who is on the call.
I think we're already.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that we've approved this ages ago, because it was less about the timeline of how flow gets released and more about the way flow gets exposed. And we kind of did multiples of these options. Like we did option 1, we have a flow specific binary, and we did option 2 also. we did both of them. So I think this is approved. The only thing that's kind of up in the air still is the release timeline, but that was never part of the proposal. That was just like a suggestion for what we might do. Does anyone disagree that this is approved?
Okay, that makes sense. Do you think we should close it now or just leave it open and close it later?
I'm gonna mark it. Oh, we don't have proposal approved, do we? No, it's proposal accepted. Sorry. I'm gonna mark it accepted, and then I'm gonna close it as completed because we did really do this.
Okay. So, yeah, Yeah, I'm just wondering if it makes more sense to go from the more recent to the least recent proposals. Now we're going from the earliest to the to the most recent last. But yeah, sure. We can just go like this. So what is this spot from root again? Require all capsule values to implement marker interface.
I think my suggestion would be we focus on like the user ones, because those might be more interesting than like this is like a low level thing.
Yeah, it does seem very low level. Okay, this one is for me, and this one is quite user facing. So if I remember correctly, the issue was that if you hit the reload endpoint on the agent, it will say that the graph load failed if there was an error with the new configuration, but but it didn't exactly fail. So let me see again what was. Yeah, okay. So I think the problem was that if you try to reload the configuration of the agent, and your new configuration has a certain problem with a certain component, then the agent would apply as much as possible from that configuration. Then the parts that it couldn't apply, they would just stay the same as the old configuration. And it would give you back this error from when you hit the endpoint, that there was an error loading the graph. But the error is misleading because you might think that the graph wasn't really loaded at all, when in reality it loaded a part of it. And my proposal here was that we should either clarify the error to say that it's not really an error, it's more of a maybe a warning or a partial error, that a lot of the changes were applied, and maybe we should even clarify which changes to the graph were applied. Or we should simply reject the whole graph reload if even part of the graph fails. And I personally think it would be more intuitive if we reject the whole graph reload rather than try to accept as much as possible and then potentially leave parts of the graph running with the old configuration. What do you think? Are there any comments on this? Okay, let me see who is on the queue. So Matt, I think you raised your hand first.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of it being more atomic and that changes generally get applied or they generally don't. I know there's a lot of nuance there, especially if things are loading from network. Might be some issues there. But in general, I like it being more atomic, which would be agreement with the proposals.
Thank you. Jorge?
Yeah, my question is in line with what Matt said. So when we're loading, say, a module from the network, if there's an error there, should that make the entire reload fail for like the entire config, or should we try to, mark the module as unhealthy, but keep going?
Yes, Rob?
I think there's some. I'm okay with this to a certain level, but then to a more deeper level, I think It depends on how deep this goes. Like if you give it an invalid config file, we reject that whole thing. We don't make any changes. I think that's okay. What I don't want to do though is while we are rolling out a config file, if one component rejects its new config, then we have to walk back and revert all the changes we made to all the other components. Because, well, I don't know why yet, but that's just my gut feeling. My gut feeling is like, I'm okay if the config file as itself is atomic, but changes to the graph, like as components get updated, I think that should still stay the way it is, which is a gradual rollout. But I think also that we already do this. Like, if you give it a valid config file, I think we stop there. So I think from that perspective, this is already implemented. But I think that's not what you're talking about. I think you were talking about making everything atomic and doing rollbacks and stuff.
Yeah, that's correct. But it doesn't have to be necessarily a rollback. It really depends on how we apply the configuration. If we, for example, let's say construct some kind of graph and then swap the two graphs, then it's not really a rollback. You just never swap the graph if you couldn't construct the new graph in the first place.
No, but you have to do a rollback because you have to apply the graph gradually. Like, let's say it's a local file being fed into a Prometheus scrape, right? You have to apply the local file first, and if that fails, well, sorry, then you can apply the Prometheus scrape. But if there's like a complex chain of that, you have to walk it back to the first thing that failed, and then revert everything. Actually, you have to walk back everything. Anything that changed up to that point needs to be reverted back to its previous state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess it depends on how we're creating this graph, so to speak. Yeah. Matt, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I think part of me feels there's some difficulty with this with modules. Not to say we can't overcome it, but maybe the more nuanced approaches. You roll back. If a module fails, you roll back to a given safe state. Like maybe it is not the whole config's atomic, but a flow instance is atomic. I don't know if that solves anything, but it may narrow down scope.
Yes, Eric?
Yeah, I just want to add in the context of modules that much of the reload, I think that we're somewhat talking about here, like hitting like a reload endpoint won't actually reload a module, in the sense that if the actual if the module loader component didn't change, but say it's like pulling a file, it's the puller that reloads the module. So that could fail at pull time at any point in time if somebody updates that file to something bad or invalid. It's a little different than the typical case of, hey, hitting a reload endpoint, I want to reload the whole graph. So it's just a behavioral difference there.
Yeah, and we just added clarification that we don't try to reload if it fails to get the config. So we do handle some like just invalid configs, but you could feed it a config that parses and maybe leads to an invalid state.
I want to make sure we're still talking about what this proposal is actually talking about, because the change it's saying to make is something we already do. And so I'm trying to roll back to what release even was January 10th. What was? Yeah, it's not 31, maybe 30. Okay, 30 was the relevant release on January 10th. Let me see what that does real quick. Because if we're doing this now, I think we can close this as we've done this. But whether or not we make the entire apply of the graph atomic is potentially a different discussion that needs a lot of thought, like a ton of thought. Okay, I can say I'm looking at it now. We accidentally implemented this ages ago. I don't know when we did this, But I'm looking at the code from when this was opened.
Yeah.
And that check was not in there, but it is in there now. I think Eric might have accidentally done this. Going behind everyone's
said it was
back,
an accident,
implementing
Robert.
proposals. Yeah.
Does it work through modules? I don't know how it could actually.
Well, it's when you
There's no way it could.
It's when you apply a graph. If there is an invalid reference or a cycle or anything that is wrong with that graph, it will stay on the last valid graph.
So to make sure I understand, so we're not applying the graph as we walk it. We're first building the graph and then we apply it. So it's kind of 2 steps.
And that was how it worked before. Like we construct the graph, then we walk and apply everything in the graph. But it didn't matter before if there was a problem in that graph. So now we construct the graph, and if there's an error, we return early. We don't walk it in that case. Okay, yeah, Eric did do this one. Let me see when he did this. I'm not blaming you, Eric, but
Sounds like I'm getting blamed. No, there was quite significant work done around modules in this area of the code base. So
yeah, this is for the module argument block is when this got implemented. So I think from that perspective, the thing that this proposal is specifically saying to do has been done.
Nice. Yeah.
I mean, I think as long as we exclude things loaded from external sources, maybe it's.
No, I think we are doing this. Like if there's a graph error, it will not load that graph. Like we are doing that now.
But we don't go back to the exact same state.
It retains state, like nothing changes.
No, because a load file happens asynchronously, right? So like if we're loading a module for an external source and that module has changed since a reload, maybe, like we don't guarantee that state's the same.
We do, because we don't load the new graph. The new graph failed to load, so it stays in the last valid graph.
Okay, maybe. I think I'd have to map it out. Like if modules called modules, I don't know how that would work.
Anyways, I think we can close this as completed. I'll let the comment saying what PR implemented it.
yeah, maybe it would be worth Paul retesting his case there and seeing if it meets his expectations. Worth a quick sanity check and then good to go.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, from what Robert said, that was indeed the flow path I was referring to. So yeah, sounds pretty good. Thank you. Good to know that it's so implemented, but I'll check later. So yeah, let's move on. What do we have here? Something from Pascalis. I don't know if this is user facing, but it seems like yeah, it's not some internal implementation detail. Do we have Pascalis on the call? Yeah, we do. Okay.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Pascalis. So I'm just reading through your proposal now.
Should I provide some context around it?
Yes, please feel free if you'd like to, while we're reading your proposal, to be helpful.
Okay.
I also posted
Generally,
the proposal.
Thanks for providing the link. But yeah, generally it's hard to understand what's going on in the Loki.process component when you have multiple stages and especially ones that are branching or conditionally applied. So that this inspect stage could help with that by not altering lines and either passing them out of standard output or having a way of displaying them in the UI. And the idea of the logql selector that I didn't remember adding here is also potentially interesting.
Wait, what do we? Sorry, what does the inspect stage do?
It's not super clear. It either outputs all the log entries that are passed to it on standard output, like it logs them as in the format that the agent logs out, or it adds them to a special entry in the debug info of the component, of the logged process component.
That's interesting.
Yes, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it exposes something to the debug info, I think there's a lot of asterisks around something. I think that's pretty helpful. And I think originally with Flow, being able to kind of hooks into data flowing between two components was always a cool idea, and this is sort of like that.
Yeah, makes sense.
You could ignore that comment. That's another proposal on this list.
By the way, currently there is a workaround to this with the Loki.echo component, so that you could split your Loki.process pipeline in the middle and have it forward to the Loki.echo component and then to the rest of the pipeline. But by no means it's as handy as having that built into the pipeline itself.
Yeah, you also can't do the selector with what you're saying either. I'm wondering if, I mean, we have selectors in, we have like a match stage, I think, right? Where you can like do custom processing if it matches a certain selector.
Yeah, that's correct.
But it seems like if we had I almost wonder if it's more powerful in general for debugging and for other use cases if we had a match stage which, instead of like executing other stages, could forward logs to other components, because that would also cover this use case here, as long as Loki Echo supported some type of sampling fraction. And that would also open up a ton of other types of use cases too that aren't just limited to debugging. You get what I'm saying? Like instead of like inspect going to S standard out, you could like give it a list of components to send the logs to.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I don't know if it's a certain stage only, because generally the idea of routing logs is an interesting one to explore. But yeah, it's certainly a way to do this here.
I mean, I'm okay with this. I just think there's potential if we're looking for a single solution, I think we should keep looking. But if we're okay with having multiple ways of debugging, I think this is fine.
I didn't raise my hand, sorry. If we do go with this is mostly for debugging, maybe rename it to debug instead of inspect. I think that makes it more clear where you'll find it. But that's probably bike shedding more than it needs to be for the proposal, though.
Are we saying accepted? Do you want to add the accepted label there, Colin?
Yeah, sure. Is that just the label here?
Yeah, it's proposal dash something. Or yeah, there it is.
Proposal accepted. Nice. Yep. Yeah, sounds good to me as well. Just the thing is that people would have to reload the configuration for this to take an effect. I kind of wish there was a way just to use the UI to inspect most things without having to reload the config. But I guess in this case, it would be a bit harder. Okay. Seems like we have another one for the debugging.
So this came out of the other issue. Maybe this isn't necessary anymore with modules and kind of all that stuff. But the idea was to have a component called debug variables, where it could have a collection of different variables with different default values, like info for log level, and you could reference that like any other component, except the debug variables also supports like an HTTP API where you can change the value of the variable at runtime, and that would cause a graph reload because it'd be a new export. So that would hypothetically allow you to say like, well, I'd start with info, but I could go to the UI or I could hit up an endpoint to change that whenever I want. At the bottom of this page, I also describe integration with the UI, where the UI could show a special page for debug variables, which allow you to just type in the value instead of like having to hit up an endpoint like with curl or something. But given modules, I don't know how much value this provides anymore because modules are effectively very, very similar. Although this is more like value level rather than like entire module level. And also, yeah, like it integrates with like conditionals, like I show here, where you could, switch between a local and a cloud Prometheus based on what your debug variable set to.
Yes, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could definitely do this with modules. This is a little cleaner. I think it depends on how often this would get used, maybe. This is a few either local remote getters and a coalesce statement, basically, would be the way to do it in today's world.
I'm going to poo-poo my own proposal here. I think this would not. This is something you would shove in your config. I don't think you would have a permanent config file where you have everything set to debug, like a debug variable, because otherwise it's just a mess, right? So I don't know if this encourages a clean config. Like if you wanted to test something in your config file, just change the config and reload it, right? So I think based on that and like the conditional thing, like can you imagine our production configs just having like a hook in it forever? I don't know. Like I think maybe with modules and all this stuff, I would actually vote against my own proposal now. I would say no to this. I don't think this is useful.
Yeah, I personally think it might make it a bit harder to see what's going on exactly in the configuration. Okay, are there any other comments on this proposal? Yeah, okay, well, I don't think I have to label it as rejected. We can maybe just move on to the next one if you'd like.
I think we can reject it. Like rejecting doesn't mean it's gone forever, right? Just like, yeah, thumbs down, boo. Sorry, I don't think the thumbs down will show on the recording. It just sounds like I'm just saying boo. Yeah. And then I'll leave a comment and close it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have another one which I think would be interesting because it's really related and could make some configuration nicer maybe. Function closures. I've been hearing about function closures for as long as I've been in the team. I never read this proposal though.
Oh god, I don't know if we have enough time to discuss this one. What I'll say, this is MapReduce filter. this is I said a long time ago about River allowing you to do interesting things by given access to the values of components like discovery. But you can't actually take advantage of those values today. You kind of just have to wire them around. But this would actually enable the user to have custom transformations in formats that we didn't necessarily expect, like relabeling rules, to change things with exactly what they want to do. It would be a power user type of thing, but with modules, power user type things are, kind of hidden away. So there's some discussion here about to be have like what the syntax for these should be, but really it is MapReduce filter is what I'm talking about.
Smart.
I gave it a thumbs up, but I honestly think this one should be tabled until we get conditionals, because I think it's almost entirely dependent on conditionals existing to get real functional work done, maybe.
Yeah, a little bit.
So that's the only reason I wouldn't give this thumbs up now, is because we don't have conditionals. If we did them both same time, then maybe thumbs up to both. And I also believe anything we do with this should probably be labeled maybe as experimental for a bit, because I think syntax is going to be a discussion point.
See, so when you say conditionals, you mean, for example, in this function, to have essentially some conditions like and or etc. based on what the inputs of the functions are, for example, like this target.
Yeah, so if you go to the next block, it's literally like, if, else, if, SL, right there. Oh my gosh, it moved around a lot. If you go up a little bit, but basically, yeah, right there. See, if target. So yeah, I think if we approve both this and the conditionals at the same time, then yeah, I'm totally down. I mean, I'm down with this long term, so maybe it's a thumbs up for me, regardless. Just that we got to do conditional first.
Okay, do we only want to just take a second to do conditionals? I don't know if anyone will be against this, honestly, but we can talk about
it. Yeah, why not? Sounds useful.
You're already accepted, Robert. You're good to go.
Oh, yeah. Conditionals are accepted.
Oh, right. Cool.
Well, in that case,
then I'm thumbs up for this.
Is anyone against MapReduce filter?
I don't have an opinion formed about this yet. Like, yeah, I wonder why wouldn't we use the other relabel components, or why do we have both things? Why do we have two ways of doing this? And then I also have a lot of I would want to understand how we're going to implement this in more detail.
Well, going back to why relabeling is not always the approach here. Let's say and this is a real use case, you're running an exporter component, but you want to decorate that exporter component with labels from EC2 service discovery, which map to the EC2 instance that the agent's running on. There's no way to write that today. You just can't write that today. But with MapReduce filter, you could filter down to the EC2 instances, which correspond to the one the agent's running on, and then combine the two, and then map over the the targets from the exporter component, and then merge the labels together. So that would be a use case enabled by MapReduce filter, which otherwise we would need to set aside that use case, and then create components just for that one use case. So that's kind of the idea of the MapReduce filter thing. It's like allowing users to decide what they want to do with the values we give to them in ways that we probably didn't really anticipate and probably didn't create components for in advance.
So just to quickly respond while we're on this question, it's also possible to, let's say this example you gave when you join metrics, you could also just feed that in as this additional context to the relabel component, and then have them available as values.
But that's exactly my point. We have to update all these components for new use cases. which we didn't have to do in the
Um,
past.
yeah, yeah, but I think that they could all be updated with a very generic use case of like, here's some extra map that you can grab values from.
But how do we tell the component to filter down the map to only one target? Like you discovered all your HT2 instances, but only one of them has the one you want, right? So I guess you have to fill the okay. I guess what you would have to do then is you'd have to feed that into another relabel, which filters down the targets to just one, and then you could feed that single target as the context, and then you could use that. So maybe that would work.
Yeah, I'm not sure I follow that example that you have in mind right now, but yeah, that's precisely like why I don't have an opinion about this right now, because I don't understand. Like I would like to see all the use cases and kind of contrast them side by side with continuing with our existing components versus doing something like this.
Not heavier hand raised.
Yeah, I think I find relabel config, you have to do some gymnastics to get them to do what you want them to do. And I think the other big thing is this could work on almost any data type. So like if you wanted to filter and reduce based upon like reading the JSON file, sort getting that as an array of maps, and then filter that to a random string key, that's something you can't do with relabel configs because that only works on a specific kind of data type. I think you can do a lot of gymnastics with this, for good and bad. But I think in general, having that capability is good.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's, however, like the cost of ownership, like depending how expensive these things are, that may drive a lot of our resources as a team and the community in here. So I also like be interested in understanding how it's implemented. Maybe I don't know if we like leveraging some JSONet or something like that here, maybe. But it's kind of a trade-off, like between the complexity and how many features it unlocks.
So an example I might have here that I think would be interesting is like on the forward to up there. If you want to have a conditional debug forward to that, like, hey, if this variable set, then I want it to forward to a different thing. You could do that with the map, right? Or do some other shenanigans, and that's something you just very hard to do without something like this.
So just to answer the question of the complexity of this, Paul, and if you scroll down a little bit to there's a prototype section. Then you click on that link. This is all in one commit. So if you click on just that one commit there at the top, or that maybe, well, that's not going to work because I'm way behind now. But like the message of the commit, sure, that works too. So it's really like 250 lines. I implemented this with some kind of to-dos for some things, but the bulk of the work is actually in the standard library where I implemented the oh god, what do we even call it? I think I implemented object merge or something. I implemented object merge, which is now we're saying going to be done a little bit differently in the proposal. But this is not a lot of code. Like adding functions in, because River already supports function calls. We just never really use it. No, sorry, we do all the time. Like it's really taking advantage of the existing support for functions in River.
Yeah, that's definitely making it easier. Yeah. We don't need a full consensus, but yeah, my view is like I would like to spend more time on understanding this, and maybe I'll just keep a tab open for this and take a look this week.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this sounds interesting.
Sorry, I was muted when I was talking earlier. I like what Go does. They have a label called likely accept, just to indicate that like this is trending towards a yes, but we need more time. Do we want to do that here, or do we want to just leave it?
I like the hard binary choice,
Okay.
but whatever. Like,
I personally think if we say things like likely yes, we should probably put some context on why it's likely yes. Yeah, in those cases when we don't have a consensus, it might be better just to leave a comment. With the
Right, I'll leave a comment saying that we discussed it. It's trending towards you. I'll leave a comment with context.
Thank you. So we're almost out of time. I just have one proposal. It's a new one, and it's about how we discuss proposals in the community call. I've been thinking it might be a good idea to maybe make a list of the proposals we want to talk about before the actual call. I think maybe we can get more participation that way, and it might be a good way to make sure the audience is more up to speed on the actual proposals. Maybe we can just review them before the call and just talk about it, you know, while we're on here. What do you guys think? Yes, Matt?
I meant to actually hit thumbs up. Yeah, I think having a list of proposals we'll review will be good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. We can see if we can do that next time. Okay, thank you for joining. We're basically out of time, but is there anything else, anything you'd like to discuss other than what we already talked about? Okay, well, thank you for joining the June edition of the Agent Community Call then, and we'll speak again next month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Bye.